Aloha everyone.
Aloha. So today we're going to work on what Tim Tackett actually wrote in his Black Belt Magazine article. So you guys are going to get to see some of the JKD article. If you haven't read it yet, or if you want to read it, you can also go to your local bookstore or Barnes & Noble or something like that.
We'll show you what it looks like.
Yeah.
So basically, this is the issue that just came out with Bruce Lee on the cover. It talks about Tim Tackett teaches JKD's Essential Principles. Now this is actually quite important to bring up because Jeet Kune really is more about concepts and principles than it is about techniques. In a sense, there's almost no technique because there is every possible technique, if that makes sense to you. So in one sense, a punch is a punch, a kick is a kick, but in another sense, you have everything that has ever happened in the history of the world at your disposal, at your ability to draw in, as well as anything you could potentially imagine or conceive of in the future, and all of that is there for you from the past, the present, and the future, and you use the principles to discern whether or not that's going to be something that you can absorb as useful for you and that will be part of your expression as a martial artist. So the principles are the thing. You can plug anything into the principles and it'll make sense. So basically, this is part 1 of 2 in an article series that he's doing on the principles of Jeet Kune. And you might also notice, by the way, that Sifu gave me one of his t-shirts so we can be matching for you. You also might notice my outfit, which I didn't fully put on yet so I could show off the t-shirt. But basically this is high gear from Coach Tony Blauer, and it's used to be able to do full contact training. And using progressive resistance and pressure testing what you train is super critical to having your martial arts be realistic and be applicable to the real world. And it's also something that on an innovative level was quite important in the early days of Jeet Kune Do, right? Because as Guru Danny Nasanto points out, they were the first to utilize sports equipment from other sports to enhance their martial arts training, such as boxing, focus mitts, hockey protective gear, baseball protective gear, like the catcher's outfit and everything, because then you can actually have that resistance. Now, historically, it goes back way further. When you think about the European fencing masters had protective gear that they would use to train their students, and so all of the students would be wearing white in the salle, in the fencing hall, right? And the master at arms, right, would be here with his sword, but he would be wearing a really thick protective jacket, similar to what medieval knights wore under their armor, under the mail, to help pad against blows and strikes and slashes to the body. They would wear an undergarment underneath the chainmail. Now that undergarment was then utilized for fencing coaches later so that they would have protection when they would feed their students different attacks, and the students were supposed to parry and riposte on the armor. Now that concept was very true in fencing, and as you know, Bruce Lee's brother was an expert fencer, and fencing became part of the influences that helped him to develop his martial art. You know, fencing, boxing, along with Wing Chun, Kung Fu were all important influences for Bruce Lee. And knowing that, growing up, I pursued that. I went out and boxed. I went out and, you can tell I boxed from my nose, but I went out and boxed. I also did fencing, even though back in the day, maybe even still, it was kind of seen as dorky in high school, but I did it anyway because I wanted to learn how to fence. And then of course Wing Chun, very grateful to Sifu Robert Young and James Sweet. And then in Hong Kong, Wong Sheng Leong, Ip Chun and Ip Ching for sharing Wing Chun with me. So conceptually, that triad of martial arts was the base of the original Jun Fan, and then everything in the world that he could get his hands on became part of what became Jeet Kune Do and continues to evolve to be. your Jeet Kune, our Jeet Kune. It's an individual expression.
And part of that exploration was finding out different fighting measures, which is our first topic from the book, which each one had a specialty in each range. For instance, the Wing Chun range was very close range, combat oriented, while even weapon range, like even the Kali Eskrima or the fencing sword, was very long range, but utilizing some of those concepts from fencing to make a long weapon like the Byuji in Wing Chun, or also in JKD, where we extend a little further using the more fencing body posturing and extensions. So that's like our first actual.
Yeah. So in the article, principle number 1 is the fighting measure. Now this is kind of important because most people, when they think of the fighting measure, actually go from far to close because it's comfortable, particularly if you've ever gone to a Jeet Kune seminar. They'll either start at one end or the other. So they'll either start very far away and you're working on the pendulum kick or something like this, or you'll be working very close and initiating with the trapping, which of course JKD is famous for. Now, in practical application, here's the thing. Range is very fluid. So in a real fight, you don't necessarily start far and go close, right? You start wherever you start. So in a real situation, we might just be in conversational range like this, and then I'd be boom, and then now it's on. Right? Now it's on, and we're already here. It's not like I started way far out here and went, hey you, I'm going to come in and move. And so now from super far away, he has the timing and measure to do a kick as I come in. Right? You see? So that would be great, and in a multiple attacker situation, that can certainly happen. But in terms of training, the fighting measure is going to be unique first individually. Your body, how long are your arms, how long are your legs, and how does that configure from your posture, from your stance, from your baijang. So depending on how your body's loaded, right, it's going to depend. Some people carry their hands lower because of kicking, right? I tend to have mine higher, but that's also partly because, especially here in Hawaii, I'm taller than the average person. So it's more natural for me to go down to incoming pressure than it is for me to go up to incoming pressure. So it's all relative. It might make more sense if Nate and I are facing each other, right? For him to be a little lower than me because he then can intercept underneath my guard, right? Conversely, if I know about this issue, it might make sense for me to stay high so that I can intercept and counterattack using gravity as my natural ski slope, right? My ski slope into his face, right? Or a skateboard ramp into his face, or a surfing wave into his face. Whatever you want to conceive, I'm going to use natural forces into his face, or whatever target we're going to be looking at. But so fighting measure is first relative to your body. I used to hang a piece of yarn off of the pull-up bar in my room as a kid, and I would practice being at distance and trying to use just the tip of my middle finger to pop the yarn and see what different changes in footwork I could use to get that little extra from the furthest possible away to be able to get the target, right? So fighting measure first is your body, knowing that how close is too close, how far is too far for you to be able to barely make contact. And then within range, meaning he has to determine, right, how far is far enough where he's safe. Because my arms are longer, so like fighting measure is going to be relative. If we're here, and I'm way out here at the edge of frame, and if he does not move, just with a change in posture, I can get him, right? If we're here, and I have that rear heel a little bit loaded, and my weight is balanced, as I shift forward driving off of that rear leg, the mere slightest pivot, and my view would already be able to intercept his eyes. I'm using his forehead for safety. Now, conversely, in this range, he will just barely miss because my arms are longer. If he uses the same extension I did without any foot drift, at full extension, go ahead, all I have to do is shift slightly and he'll miss. So he has to know this, because part of fighting measure means that for me, if I use a drift, I'll go through him, right? For him, he needs the drift just to hit the target. Yes, okay? So first you're working your technique with your fighting measure, then you're working your accuracy, right? And then you work your power and speed. So at this level right now, we're feeding each other a target, and then from here, I'm going to be just trying to touch a hot stove, right? And then he does the same thing to me, just trying to touch the hot stove. First, you're doing the slow, smooth, deliberate action using your economy of motion, your alignment into your target with your body lined up powerfully behind the tip of the spear, right? And your body is driving through. He'll do that so that you can see it from his point of view, right? So that's just working the technique. Then the accuracy, being able to deliver the technique functionally and go bam, right? And then he's going to do the same thing to me, boom, right? And that's going to be still working your fighting measure. Now, can you deliver that with power and speed? For that, we use the training tools that we were talking about. Feel free to add to that.
We're talking about the guard. Sometimes you might adjust within it. If you notice people are always hitting you high, maybe you need to bring your hands a little higher. If you see the kicks coming on the lower body, then maybe that other stance is better with the hand lower. Other advantages as the attacker with the hand low, this can come out from underneath the eye range. So like the eye jab that we're just doing now is going to sneak up through the middle and even possibly block a hand as it's going up. As you see in like the form from Wing Chun, you're snapping upward with that yuji so that you're redirecting the hand or the arm that's attacking you from underneath. If we were to show that from here, if you're doing that, I guess a left jab or right jab, it'd be like this, right? So I'm going through here, or even on the other side, which you see in Tim Tackett's illustration, is that he's popping from the outside but bringing his arm in through the middle and doing that yuji. So if you want to see it in action, that's what it would look like. Because right now it's a picture of that action, but that's kind of what's going on.
That is what's going on, and then what is, there's a Hawaiian saying, right? Which is, see what is seen and see what is not seen, right? And so what do I see in terms of fighting measure with that specific example? So yes, I see what you just saw. If we're both in a right lead, and he throws the jab and I come in and I hit the eye, right? That's at within range. Does that make sense? If I'm out of range and he throws that same jab, my view could actually be my initial intercept, because he's so far away that I know he's using the jab as a way to bait me, right? As an attack by draw to force my motion. So instead of trying to do this and then my intercept is worthless, as he comes in, I use the view to then reorient, right? So I can go yoom, or I can do it as a multiple combination where I'm going 1, 2, 3, right? Whatever you want to do, you can skip in or you can multiple. But the point is, that's at far range. In range, you'll do as Sifu Nate demonstrated. He'll demonstrate, I give him the jab and he comes in with the view, right? I give him the jab, he comes in with the view. Now, what happens when that fighting measure gets a little bit more intimate in a close combat? We're here, right? And he throws that same jab, and now my view goes past his neck. And now I'm in a head and arm triangle. You see that? So he's here on the corner. We're now closer distance. That jab comes in. I do my view, but now my view goes through. And this is actually a hit. And then we're going into the head and arm triangle. Bam. Okay? And that can be then a takedown and on the ground. So understand that principles exist in every plane.
Right.
Because we can do this standing, we can do this on the ground while we're ground fighting, and now you're executing the same concept. because it's just a relative equation of fighting measure that now we're closer to each other, but the principles still exist. They still have a functional place. So see that fighting measure is relative to the problem. It also isn't always equal, right? For example, we were talking about the fencing. If I have the sword and he has nothing, then my fighting measure is way out here, and if he doesn't move, I can every time exactly tap it, right? And honestly, this is how I always teach beginners the concept of having that line and understanding the place that fencing has within the overall scheme of things. Now, that's going to be where I'm effective. In order for him to win, he has to get past that point, and once he gets to the guard, he's home free, because my mind might be trapped in the end of my weapon. So once he's inside range, no good. Now it changes once things are equal. If we both have a weapon, right? Now we're in weapons range. We'll see how far we can go and still be within frame for the camera here. But look, here, he can't touch me, I can't touch him. But we both know we'll use the classical bridge position reference point, but with the stick, we're just a beat and a pop away, right? Go ahead. We're just a beat and a pop away from being able to execute, right? And of course, if you're familiar with Kali, you know, there's all kinds of ways to do this. Yeah. But your fighting measure then adjusts. It adjusts again if he has it, and I don't. So now I've got another problem. I've got to cut the line of his fighting measure to be able to come in. And then now it switches. I'm here. He has to be able to beat the line of my fighting measure to employ his fighting measure, which is going to switch automatically once the other person has the weapon. So, you know, in real life, not everything's equal. I used to joke about this, actually, because what are the chances that you're going to be walking along the street and you have a 27-inch stick and the other guy has a 27-inch stick? It's not that likely. You're training all of these things not so much for a duel where both of you have the same thing, but for an inequitable situation. So again, on fighting measure, it starts amping up, clear? It starts amping up if we're using edged weapons, right? Because now, at quite a long distance, you have a very lethal fighting measure, right? Whether we're just using the fencing strategy of a beat, or whether we're defanging the snake, whatever we're doing, it's very, very much problematic both at range and up close and personal. So, regardless of where we are, right? Conceptually, this fighting measure, very, very dangerous, right? But also, this fighting measure, very, very dangerous. And what if he has earth grip and I have heaven grip, right? You have all these different variations that affect your fighting measure. So just the first principle he mentions in his book can be an endless thing, especially if it's inequitable, right?
Which is more like what knife fighters actually do. They use his hand and keep the weapon safe until they're ready to jab in there. Exactly, right?
And, you know, because Guru Dan kind of made this a famous equation,
right?
Firearm versus edged weapon, the fighting measure favors the firearm very, very far, right? And there's the Twiller drill where within 21 feet, if this is holstered and he has a blade, he could potentially stab you before you're able to get your weapon online. So fighting measure is a very relative thing, and just that one principle, just that first thing he mentions, gosh, that could cover you for years of really outstanding and fascinating training. So principle number one, fighting measure, don't take it for granted. In old school karate, it was called ma'ai. It was also called that in Japanese swordsmanship arts, where you're checking that distance and understanding where you're most effective and where your opponent is most effective, and how to make adjustments to have that equation be to your advantage. So number one is fighting measure. All right? So we'll put the weapons down and we'll get on to principle number 2 for you. Principle number 2 is economy of motion. So economy of motion, on a simple level, is illustrated by the straight blast, because the shortest distance between 2 points is a straight line, right? So conceptually, if we're training this, right, he's working on delivering the line, right? And in the beginning, again, we're working on the technique of the straight line. And this economy of motion is not just an offense with the straight blast, it is also a defense. I put it up at obstruction, and he's able to move my defense out of the way with his chain punch, right? So his attack is also his defense, right? I put up an obstruction, he's going to come in on the chain. I put up an obstruction, he's going to come in on the chain. That's the simplest way to illustrate economy of motion, is that not only is it going from point A to point B as directly as possible, but it's having one tool do more than one job.
Right.
If that makes sense. More you want to add to that?
Just fighting down the center line also, as we mentioned, is dividing that punch in the center, but also the shortest distance between my body and my weight here, as I'm transferring that energy forward as I'm striking. So especially when you're walking into this, there's a lot more power when you're actually pushing the guy back and using your leg stance as well as body weight to transfer that power. And if you notice, we're not using a lot of rotational force, so that power is actually coming from the body's weight and the legs pushing forward as you're doing that straight blast.
Yeah, so an economy of motion actually is the totality of it. So in other words, there's your footwork, right? Which is your weapons delivery system. How are you getting yourself, the human weapon, to the target, right? Then there's the actual movement of your weapon, right? The technique involved. Because in truth, as a human body, you're not a straight line. You're an organic being. So it's a series of circles and triangles and lines that all work together to create the effect. So maybe the tip of the finger moves in a straight line to the target, right? But behind that tip of the finger, the flange, the metacarpals, the radius, the ulna, the humerus, the clavicle, the skeletal system, as well as the muscular system, brachioradialis, all the different parts of your body, biceps, triceps, right? They're all going to work together to develop that effect of getting that tip to the target. Okay? So then if he's going to use an economy of motion, now he's going to apply it with a little bit more power to the pad. Okay? And then if I want to add fighting measure to this, go a little closer to them, he has to time it. Right now, if I come to him and he punches, he hits nothing. So he has to time it. When can he hit it? When can he hit it? When can he hit it? Now do 3. Now, as an ambush, right? He's relaxed. He's just standing there. He's not ready. And I'm like coming up to him. Hey, what? Da 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 da. Bam! When he's in range, he goes. Hey, you took my parking spot. Hey, I don't like your shirt. Just kidding. I love the shirt. Okay? Now in reverse, I'm stationary and he comes to me like a gunslinger. I'm stationary. When he's in range, he goes. He comes out. When he's in range, boom. So part of your economy of motion is being able to play with, is the bad guy coming to you? Are you coming to the bad guy? Are you coming together and clashing? Is it coming from 0 where you weren't ready at all? Is it coming from a conversation that's going south so you're already actively engaged? You don't get surprised if you already practice all this stuff, right? So the more variety that you genuinely train in a foundationally functional way, following the principles, the better prepared you are to functionalize your tools, which is why we're only showing you one. On the first example with fighting measure, we were mainly just showing the entry of the view because that's what Sifu Tackett showed in his article. But we showed it at range, we showed it mid, and we showed it going into grappling, which is one of my specialties. Then now working with the economy of motion, pretty much only showing you the straight blast. You can do this with any tool, but I'll let Sifu Nate say one of Bruce Lee's famous sayings on why we would cultivate one tool. Bam!
If you practice one kick 10,000 times versus practicing 10,000 different kicks once, that's the more fearful opponent than the one that practices 10,000 different kicks all over the place, right? So the exact quote would be, I fear the man who practices 10,000 kicks once rather than the man who practices 10,000 kicks once, right? So.
Right. So in other words, it's better to know one thing extremely well and be able to apply it under all kinds of conditions than it is to be the guy that's Mr. Know-It-All that has 10,000 moves but can't do any of them under pressure for real, right? Which is going to drive us to Sifu Tackett's third principle. So remember, number one was fighting measure. Number two was economy of motion, right? And you're going to see how these platform on each other as we get to number three here, and it's train with emotional content. Oh my gosh. So you don't realize it, but I've already given you a preview of this when I was kind of hassling him a little bit. So it's important to do the emotional content in more than one way. What do I mean by that? As a coach, as a trainer, to develop Sifu Nate from who he was as a high school kid when I met him to who he is now, teaching professionally, I had to not only cultivate his ability to be technically sound in technique or to communicate well, to be able to help you, right? But more than anything else, I had to develop the ability to really pull it off for real and be able to defend himself. So that's, one of the core reasons why people come to train, right? Health and fitness, maybe it's more fun than running. Internal self-confidence, becoming a better person, all of those kinds of really important qualities through life, because I hope you don't get in lots of fights. And then third, because you want to be able to defend yourself. You want to be able to protect your family, right? Fourth, as a form of sport, right? So instead of tennis or racquetball or pickleball or whatever, you do this and you might even enjoy competing, right? So, which we've both done. And then finally, as a form of artistic expression, films, presentations, theater events, artistic exploration, right? So all of these are valid reasons to train, and truthfully, Bruce Lee did all of this, right?
And then speaking of that, this comes from the Enter the Dragon quote when he's teaching it's Lao's time, right? He's having tea, and his student comes in, and then he asks him to kick, right? And the kick, he kicks, and he just does it kind of lazily like that. And he's like, what is this, an exhibition? If we need emotional content, right? So that's what we're talking about, emotional content. Then he goes a little bit to the extreme. So like just like a student would go into too much of an extreme, like partiality in the third stage of cultivation. He goes and he gets like a little bit angry and goes, wow, and he tries to kick it. But then he's like, no. I said emotional content, not anger. Try again, with me. And then when he says with me, he means kind of this relationship that we already went through about fighting measure. So then he gets into that stance, and then right when it's time to move, he will bam, and he kicks it, and that's what he's like, oh, that's it. And he almost got him there because he came out of that explosive emotional content where it was more a spontaneous action than like a predictable one where both were very predictable. The exhibition one where I'm just doing whatever, the one I'm like, I'm gonna hit you and then boom, and then I'm going, then it's all of those telegraphed. The other one was just like expressed through one fluid motion with the same intention of emotional connection there, but also with more conviction. So that conviction is really the key. Throwing your strikes out with conviction as a way of emotional content, kind of a translation of that.
And truly you want to go beyond anger to a sense of determination and resolve, temerity, an iron will. Because in the beginning, switching fear to anger can be helpful, right? You're afraid of a bully, so then instead of thinking fearfully, you're thinking, if I had one chance to get back at that bully, then when he gets close to me, bam, I unleash, right? So then that can be somewhat anger-based. And a lot of times that transforming the kitten into the tiger concept is something that is useful to help especially kids or young people that are learning to handle their emotions. But then you want to channel that in a forcefully positive way eventually, where you're not a hair trigger that's easily provoked, but that you have a moral compass that guides you on when the appropriate moment is to flick that switch. Because Bruce Lee did say that it should be like flicking a light switch. Like the opponent should not be able to read you where from 6 feet away or over 6 feet away during COVID-19, that you can see that you're like, I'm angry guy, right? Or I'm fearful guy, right?
Two extremes, like you said. You have to be in the middle so you can spontaneously spring out of that.
You want to be in what they would say in the espionage or special operations world. You want to be the gray man. You want to be somebody that is hard to perceive, so that when you do have to flick that switch, it's instantaneous. And it's kind of fun to almost exaggerate that in training. So what do I mean by that? So I'm going to be the bad guy for Nate, and he's going to act like the innocent, he doesn't want to do anything, and then at the moment that he sees it is open, he's going to explode into the pad, okay? So we'll give you an example of what we mean. So what I want you to see is that to cultivate emotional content is not just a one-way flow, right? It's not just the person doing the techniques, but as a coach, as a trainer, I want to feed him something to bounce off of, right? So in acting, I remember as a kid, I was in this show, and I'm off camera, and the main guy is the guy talking to me, but you can't see me. And he complimented me and saying, "Oh, you fed me very well. Thank you, I needed that." Meaning, I was giving him emotional content, right?
Yeah.
So if you don't feed it, it's hard to build it.
Right. So that same thing with relationship, right? They can't play off of a no emotional content line. There's nothing there for me to say anything to. It's hard. So then, yes, exactly what you meant by feeding it correctly. He's like, "Oh, thanks for feeding me that way," because now it helps me to respond in a more natural, more true way. Then it doesn't become acting; it becomes unacting or acting, like Bruce Lee says in one of his interviews. It doesn't have to be acting if you're doing unnaturally, naturally.
Yeah. So utilizing the same two tools that you've seen so far, right? So I'm going to be hassling him. Right. Hey, how come you over here? What, brah? What? You go over here. What you doing over here? Hey, how come you don't listen to me? Okay, you see it? So I provoke him. He looks, this signals to him an opportunity where I'm open or weak, right? And it's a crawl, walk, run, so I'll do this with a pad. It also is helpful when you're working with students that you don't know maybe how their self-control is. So if you trigger them, and you do have to talk about this ahead of time, because we live in a time where people might take it the wrong way and genuinely have hurt feelings. So we don't want that. It's a very gradual process. Now you gotta understand, I've been working with this young man for a really long time, so 14 years. So we've had the time to develop that sense of trust where I can be quite the jerk in my provoking him, and he knows it's just to help him become a stronger martial artist, become a better proponent and exponent of the martial arts. So you see this concept? Now we're going to do the same thing. I'm going to feed him the jab after I shove him, and then he's going to do the view. So I'm like, what, brah? Then I throw the jab, and he does the view, right? I shove him. I throw the jab, and he does the view, right? Shove, bang. Maybe one time I only shove it once, right? Maybe I go straight to the jab. He has to pay attention, right? Okay? So you can cultivate the tools where maybe we're working the chain punch, maybe we're working the view, right? Later on, it can be almost anything. But you want to crawl, walk, run with this so that you cultivate each tool, again, because one thing done 10,000 times is more valuable than doing 10,000 things once. Yeah. So that's kind of a concept of the emotional content. You can do it a little bit by yourself. I think I mentioned the string on the pull-up bar. I would be there and be like, I am still like the water in the still wind of calm, and the gentle breeze is touching the bamboo. Right? So
Right.
whatever it is.
That is actually very true. He talks about, Bruce Lee talks about in a lot of his books and his writings, that using imagination is part of that emotional content. Like, there's nobody in the room right now, but we can pretend that there's like 30 guys here and we're fighting all of them. Even though we're just shadow boxing, we're like not just doing a technique just to do it. I'm not just throwing my hand just to do my Buji, but I'm like, okay, what's he gonna do? Bam, and I'm gonna move, right? I'm gonna make it alive and make it an actual practice where I'm getting something out of it. Even though maybe technically I'm telling myself when to hit, it's a little bit more valuable than just like, I'm hitting,
Yes.
and whatever. You know?
If you're just hitting, it's droning.
Yeah.
And quite honestly, in competing in tournaments, especially back in the day when I was first starting, I would say almost 80% of my training was visualization. Meaning that I would go through what were my best techniques, and if I saw the guy did this, then I would do that. Or if I sensed movement from the center line, I would do this. If I sensed it from the outside, I would do that. And I would have all of these imaginary fights with my invisible friends, right? You know, like when you're a little kid and you have like your fortress of invisible friends where your stuffed animals talk to you. Maybe I should be admitting to this on camera, but anyway. You get the concept. So imagination and creativity, cultivate that, and all the emotions you have, that's the truth of who you are. So cultivate that and use it in a positive way by applying this third principle that Sifu Tackett talks about. Now let's get on to number 4, which we've already kind of shown you a little bit about the fourth principle he talks about, because we talk about train realistically. The emotional content is realistic. In real life, fights don't exist in a void, right? In real life, you have a problem that is quite major, and there's no weight classes. So this is one of these situations where my having 80 pounds on him is good for him because it gives him a realistic problem to deal with, to train realistically. Because most of the time, if you're a nice person, you're not so much getting into a fight with someone your exact same weight class. It's more likely that you have a problem with someone bigger, or more than one person, or someone who has a mental illness issue in which you don't know what size they're going to be or what gender they're going to be, or potentially someone with a weapon. So all this adversity is something that you have to grow to become comfortable with. It's a stress inoculation. And Sifu Tackett, one of his expressions is that JKD is a good BS detector, in the sense that if you don't know if it'll work until you pressure test it and you find out whether or not something will work under stress for you. Maybe not, maybe it might work for somebody else, but you don't know if it'll work for you until you test it and find out, right? And one of the core things is just not losing the beginning. So another thing that Bruce Lee determined was that the first person to land something effective usually ends up winning. So it might not always be the first thing that lands if that first thing isn't effective. So you don't just need to be efficient in terms of having efficiency of movement, but also effective in terms of landing something that causes a change to the combat, that changes the course of battle and the outcome of the war, if you will. So to do that, I'm going to put on some gear so that Nate can respond with force so that I can pressure test him a bit. Okay? First, I'm going to, before I put on the gear, because it's quite awkward, I will show the example that Sifu Tackett did in his article, where I'm defending a shoot from a wrestler. So Nate comes in to wrestle, boom, and I'm coming in and stuffing him here. Or if I was on this side, right, I can stop the attack, get the underhook, and attack the eyes. One of the ones I teach is just going straight from that into a takedown. So he comes in, boom, and then counterattack from there. So, but anyway, he's going off of a realistic attack. Why is this important? Because in today's world, MMA has already been popular for almost 30 years, 27 years, since 1993 when the UFC came out. So even if your average bad guy hasn't trained they do know some things, right?
Right.
So back in the day, maybe the ground wasn't as much of a problem, but now it's definitely a problem, right? So back in the day, that bad guy didn't usually do elbows and knees, now he might. So you're looking at dealing with common attacks. Someone grabbing you, someone throwing a sucker punch at you, someone trying to get a double leg on you. These are common attacks in real life, and they're not always covered in old school martial arts that we're dealing with a much more formal self-defense situation. So this is a much more primal thing, right? And going back to emotional content, in order to train realistically, I have to put in that emotional content into the formula. Add to that while I put the gear on.
Well, in terms of the reality training, I guess with this one, we're going to be doing simultaneous attack and a defense. So I'm going to defend whatever's going to happen to me, but I need to, like you said, make him worry about something else at the same time. I can't just be worrying about the defense part and trying to figure out how to get out. I want to make it suck immediately. So right when I'm stopping a punch or stopping a low blow or a tackle, like he did to me, if you notice, he was being nice about it, but he was nailing me, or he couldn't nail me harder, with his forearm right to my neck or my shoulder here, at the same time as he did the throat, right? So it's going to be along those same lines that we're going to do some stress testing of, like, right? Like if you're, like Bruce Lee was saying, like, it's not going to be step 1, step 2, step 3, step 4 before I do a single thing. It's going to be one movement. And this one action, I should make it a bad time for the person, right? So if here's example was like, why do I have to do step 1, step 2, step 3? I step on his foot, and he'll let go of you just grabbing my hand, right?
So I'll give you a simple example. We're going to put the two things we did in the beginning together. So watch. I'm going to be hassling him, but he's not allowed to unleash or flick the switch until I throw the jab. So I'll do this in slow motion first so that all of you who are friends of his don't think that he's training under a sadist. But because this is a gradual crawl, walk, run process that's meant to cultivate him. And my best friend from high school, when we first got this, it made him think of being astronauts or, you know, being Captain Kirk lost in space. I'm lost in space. So I always feel a little bit of laughter in regards to my friend from high school, who is also the one that I trained Coach Blauer's panic attack material with back in the day to up the realism in my training. So, you know, it's very much something Bruce Lee worked on, and that Coach Blauer is one of the innovators that took that to a whole nother level. So I'm grateful to have gleaned from both of those threads of training in our training. So here's the thread that we're going to execute. I shove him and hassle him. Hey, how come you over here, brah? What? You looking at me? What? How come you looking at me, brah? Oh, you're not looking at me, you're looking at my girlfriend. Oh no, you are looking at me. What's up with that, brah? Okay, so I'm hassling him. Then in the moment I actually throw the jab, he can do the view to the neck area because I'm wearing gear. So I throw the jab, he does the view. And then now my center line is open as my hands come up to protect my neck, and he does the center line blast, okay? So this way he executes both of the primary two techniques that we showed you in the first two examples. Does this make sense? All right, so here we go. We'll do 3 or 4 of them. What? How come you know my haircut?
Okay,
Barber shop's open again, bro.
Easy, bro.
Barber shop's open again.
It's okay.
Your hair looks stupid, bro. What? How come your shirt's so loose?
It's okay, man.
You trying to hide tattoos? No tattoos, bro. What's up with tattoos, bro? Hey.
It's okay.
Why are you looking at my feet?
No.
You took my shoes. My shoes are missing. My shoes is missing. Okay, so you get an idea? So that concept is to help you understand that we're giving a realistic example of someone that's bothering you for like no reason. You have to deal with that, right? You have to deal with their emotional content that might be irrational, it might be misplaced, And you might be completely innocent, and you know, the thing is, the bad guy doesn't care, right? The bad guy doesn't care, and so you have to know that. Because if you're a nice person, all too often, you'll be frozen with indignance and misunderstanding. You'll be like, why are they bothering me? I didn't do anything to them. You know, why are they hassling me? And that thinking process is forced processing that could make you lose the fight. So all that coming at you, it's like hail. I don't know if anyone's ever driven in hail, but I remember I drove cross country with my buddy, and we were on this mountain pass. It was like death defying, and the hail was coming at the windscreen, and it looked like in Star Trek or Star Wars when you go into hyperdrive. I mean, it was so crazy. And with that coming at me, I had to literally feel through my butt, legs, and feet. I had to feel the grooves in the road where other vehicles had made it through the snow and ice. Because I'm at the edge of a mountain pass and I can't see the drop, right? And if you make a mistake, it's over. And I was in a little sports car. I wasn't in a four-wheel drive. And very spooky. But I remember this training helping me, that I had to stay in the eye of the storm in that. It's the same feeling. I don't know if anyone else has surfed, but in the tube of a wave, you have to fully be there because all that power is going on around you, and you're in that little pocket, but it's a fragile space. It's a fragile space that you have to find that awareness, balance, and control, that ABC, to stay in that very fragile pocket. So there's this little space that has to be cultivated in dealing with the OODA loop of fear, right? And it's a progressive thing. It's can't really do it all in one little live 1 hour video for you. But the concept is important. To see how vital it is to train realistically against an opponent that really could hurt you, right? And normally I do this progressively, where first I would start out with like a big boxing glove, and I'd really punch him in the face. Not enough to injure him, but enough to like make him actually respect the problem, right? Right now I'm kind of pulling it because we're doing this on video, and I don't want any accidents. And at this point also, he's trained quite a long time, so I'm not as worried about him getting hit. But in the beginning, you will hit the person. So I also won't aim at their nose. I'll aim on purpose somewhere that's not going to cause injury. And then as they get better, they stop being afraid of that shot. They start realizing it's not so bad. It's like when I taught swimming, I've mentioned this in previous videos, little kids sometimes are afraid of the water, so you get a sponge on the edge of the pool, and you dip the sponge, and you spoosh it over your head, and they laugh, and you let them do it, and gradually they feel comfortable with the idea of their head being underwater, and then it becomes fun. What's scary becomes fun. In martial arts, that's important. What was once scary then becomes fun. And then when it's fun, it becomes something you love to do and train in and explore in.
Right, yeah, exactly. So even at the gym, we do use gear, and especially maybe I have more gear than some of the students do, so I'll wear the protective gear because they're usually going to go a little harder on me, and I want them to hit me, just like we said it before with the fencing gear, that you want the person to practice actually striking. So I'll wear the gear, like the helmet with the shield mask, and like they might be wearing gloves. At least I hope that they at least get gloves. Usually I want them to at least get the gloves so that they don't hurt their hands on my face shield and all that. But yeah, using the gear is useful for that reality base, because after they train the first few levels of understanding footwork, like we talked about, there's like the 3 triangles in the article from Chris Kent.
We're getting that on number 5.
Yeah, getting to that on number 5. So it's coming in soon. So, but basically, you saw us do stance, footwork, understanding distances, relationships from different weapon systems and different ranges of different weapons of your own body. And then when they get that, and they get a little bit more and more and more and more stress testing, then you want to do more of this reality-based stuff after they've trained it. Like, you can't go straight to reality right from the beginning sometimes if they don't even know what they have to do, right? So there's a progressive state of like crawl, walk, run, right?
Yeah, absolutely. And you know, there's also an extra level of safety important now because of the global pandemic. You don't want someone scratching and causing an open cut. And that can easily happen when you're going bare knuckles against face shields. So all these little steps allow you to up the level of your pressure testing to make it safer, right? That's why you're gonna, even with the edge weapon stuff, we have the rubber trainers and then the aluminum trainers. You work your way up so that you're starting out with safety, but then you also have to respect the tool. So once the skill base is there, you go to a little bit more difficult progressive level of resistance so that your problem is greater, right? So at the beginning I'd be using maybe a kick shield, but then in this case I'm dealing with the real fighting measure when I'm wearing the armor rather than an artificial fighting measure of the face shield. And then I can add emotional content because I'm right in here in his face, which might be more difficult with the kick shield. Yeah. So all of these principles work together. We're going to go into the fifth one now, which right here is follow a realistic training progression, which is exactly what we were just describing. So he referenced the triangle. Our friend Sifu Christopher Kent talks about this in terms of a progression as a triangle. So my own way of explaining this, and you really should, each of you should develop your own way because it needs to become yours, right? So there's like whatever it is, and then you train it, and then you have to make it your own. So with the training progression triangle, I think of it as the first part is your weapons delivery system. What's your posture like, right? Whether you're going lead hand high or lead hand low, how's your baizhang, how's your balance, how's your ability to move it in different directions, right? That's your weapons delivery system. So no matter what tool you're executing, you have to have the weapons delivery system. Right. Then there's cultivating the tool. So we just showed you this. Use the pad again. We just showed you this if we use something simple. So he has to use the weapons delivery system of the footwork to then cultivate the tool, which if we use the two examples we had, could be the view or the straight blast, right? Those were the two tools we mainly talked about today in reference to the article. And then third, application of the tool. So you can use the tool in offense and defense against different types of energies, against more than one attacker, against close range situation, far range situation, all these kinds of things. So really you can use that triangle of your weapons delivery system, your posture, your stance, your footwork, your breathing, all of that kind of foundational stuff. The particular tool you're cultivating, let's say the straight blast or the view, right? And then the ability to apply that tool in different conditions and under stress, which actually is what we were just showing in terms of training realistically. So to sum that up real briefly, right? He's going to use the fighting measure with the weapons delivery system, that as soon as this pops up, he has the perfect range to deliver his shots. Okay, so we're going to do it with the view first. Boom, boom, boom. And now we're going to do it with the straight blast. Boom, boom, boom. Okay, that's fighting measure with the tool working the weapons delivery system of the footwork and the posture and the stance, along with cultivating the tool, whether it's the view or the straight blast. Now he has to deal with varying conditions. Give an example. I stuff him and throw the jab, so he has to do the view under stress. Right? Okay? Or I do the same thing, but instead of blocking in any way, his block is his chain punch. So I have like a lawn sow out there, and he just chainsaws the lawn sow as he comes in, okay? Now, treat it as an ambush. He's just standing there, and I come in to punk him, and then he has to execute. Okay? Now he's going to do the chain. Okay? View and chain. Now view and chain. View and chain. Now he's going to do it as an ambush, where I'm clearly a threat, and as I walk up, in the example, it would be to grab his neck or something, he's going to use the view as a bridge and then follow it with the chain. Now he comes to me. He's doing a preemptive attack. I just said, I'm going to attack your wife. I don't know why I do that, but I'm going to attack your wife. And so he gets in front of his wife, and as I come back as the big scary bad guy, he's going to attack me using the view as a bridge, and then follow it up with chain punch. Ah! 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 Okay? So, cultivating it, right? With the triangle of working your footwork, your posture, your stance, your breathing, your weapons delivery system, cultivating your tool, be it the view or the chain punch or whatever tool you want to cultivate, right? And then applying it under different conditions, offense, defense, initial movement, reactive movement, under pressure, multiple attackers, you know, whatever you want to add to that. It's all about finding creative ways to cultivate your entire system and work your toolbox in a productive way.
Right. So yeah, it's all of those three progressions that we just talked about, putting it all together finally and make a sensible plan for yourself or your student or whoever you're trying to train, or if you're training yourself, work on that tool, develop it. Then, as we're doing just now, feeling it from my side of it, I have to like be really reactive of when that opportunity comes in, right?
Yeah.
I don't know when it's going to happen, but I trained it enough times to hopefully know I can use it within a split second. So he's going to train like almost a broken rhythm with me, and then pop jacket box moment, as we call it, like he likes to say, jacket box moment, where it could happen at any moment. It's just going to pop up there, and then you got to be able to move right away. Right? So I'm going to view that hand right away, then I'll just come in straight blasting, and that has to be almost automatic. And by doing that, I also have to keep myself calm in the sense of like, okay, don't react to it until that stimulus is there. By keeping myself in that state of awakened or awareness that I'm ready for whatever might happen. Like even when he was pushing me around, I'm getting all these different pushes. Sometimes I might think that's an attack, but I'm not going to react until I see an actual punch. Like that one was actually a little harder, the one with the gear and everything, because he's like pushing me, I'm like, hey, blah, 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 and I'm like, okay, just like, hey, calm down, and calm down. And I just keep my hands up in the air, just ready in case something happens. But nothing lethal or nothing damaging is happening yet. But once that hand's coming, boom, I gotta be able to move and get out of the way and just start blasting so I can push him away or kick him away. And then we're going. Sometimes I felt like blasting and front kicking and then getting away, but then that was not part of the techniques we did today. But just know that you could space.
Be.
Yeah.
I mean, it could be. I mean, we even discussed that you could use the stop kick, the pendulum kick, all these other different possible techniques. But the thing is, we're trying to also stay within the allotted time frame, and we have another class to get to. I don't know what the time is right now.
Soon.
But we wanted to be able to communicate in our own expression what we got out of Sifu Tim Tackett's article, and also to be able to encourage you to do the same, to utilize any tool that's being offered to you, such as someone like him being willing to share their knowledge in such a way. And don't just go, oh, that was nice, but actually take it in, cultivate it, and train it, because to me there's no greater compliment that you can give an author or a teacher than to do more than read what they wrote.
Right. So thank you, Sifu Tackett, for today's lesson and having us train together, that we were able to like actually put together what you were talking about, and it was really actually fun for both of us, I think, to put that together. So for the viewers all over YouTube right now that are getting to help from that insight that you gave into your article as well.
Yeah, so for Sifu Tackett, we'll do the traditional version of the bow. Thank you. Aloha. Mahalo nui loa.